So good morning. It's afternoon. I don't care. I haven't finished my breakfast, therefore it's morning. And welcome back to CrossingsCon Slipping Sideways. This is the parents and mentors panel with Diane, Duane, and Jessica DeGeorge. And just a quick reminder to our attendees, if you enjoy this panel and the convention, we will be in person next summer in Montreal, and you can find out more at register.crossingscon.org. So, for Diane and Jessica, why don't we just jump right in? I have my lovely list of questions here.
Nice.
Go for it.
So, our first question that we have for the two of you is, why do you think so much of youth fiction features dead, absent, or abusive parents or guardians? And, just to shake things up, why don't we start with Jessica?
I don't know about abusive. I think because, well, that gives your hero something to overcome, like, close to home. But I do know about dead. I understand the dead parents. The dead parents happens because as a mother, I would not let my children explore a dragon's cave. Like, in concept, it sounds cool, but my actual parents get in the way. And I was told this by my very first editor with Dragon Slippers. She's an orphan. She was not when I wrote the book. That is the one big change that my editor wanted. Was she went to the big city to make her fortune, and her kept occasionally writing postcards home to let her parents know. And my editor was like, get rid of the parents. Nobody cares. And the book also starts out with her basically being like Andromeda in Clash of the Titans, tied to the rock. No! Like, she's being sacrificed to a dragon because her parents can't afford to keep her and her family. And they were, which made them horrible people right off the bat. But they weren't supposed to be horrible people. And so she's writing postcards home to people who wanted her dead, and my editor was like, none of that works. Just get rid of them. It's so much more convenient. It absolutely streamlined the book to get rid of the parents. She didn't have to tell anyone where she was going at night. She didn't have to make excuses to anyone. And you could hate a more distant relative who had inherited her when she became an orphan and decided to sacrifice her to the dragon. Made much more sense than her own parents, who had not been abusive until that moment. So I see it a lot, especially in middle grade, because getting out of the house as a younger kid it requires a whole set of skills, very specialized skills of lying and occasionally resetting security systems now and things like that. Like even on farms and things, in a more medieval setting, there's wolves, there's bandits, there's this. Kids didn't just wander off unless they were poorly supervised or needed to bug out of there because aunt that had inherited you was a terrible, terrible woman who wanted you to be eaten by wolves. So parents are in the way. That's they're just frankly in the way.
That I can sympathize with. That's more or less how it was framed for me when I got into this. That not just our parents are in the way, but this is the way it's always been done.
So many of the fairy tales are about orphans.
Yeah,
it's
this
classic.
is traditional. And what you look back at what would have been a lot of my foundational reading as a very young reader, Edith Nesbit and so forth. And the first thing you do is just have clueless parents. If they're there, they have no idea what's going on because, frankly, it's easy to hide stuff from them. Somewhere in one of C.S. Lewis's essays, he paraphrases another writer, and I'm sorry he didn't go into more detail on it because I would love to hunt down the original prose he's quoting. He says, if you have a child who is absolutely dead set on hiding something from their parent will never find out. Period. Now, granted, we've got a whole new set of layers of technology over that, info since the quote appeared. And that said, you also have a whole new layer of kids familiar with that technology who will find a way to subvert it or get around. Now, that's part of what I was looking at when I started conceiving the parental roles for the Young Wizards book in particular. But the other thing, this is just me being contrary, okay? I am subversion girl. It's what I do. And every single piece of my major work is about taking something and turning it on its head. And I remember having that sort of framing presented to me by my first editor, where we were talking about what I was, or had done in this book, and how I might want to change it or continue it. And I just got rebellious. I said, you know what? Why does it have to be that way? This is the same voice of the writer who was going, why can't a prince rescue another prince? Why does it have to be a girl? And we see where that got me. Hi, CB.
Hi.
But that's what started it. And you have to bear in mind that this particular piece of subversion for me did not come easy. This is not something I've had into publicly, but my childhood was not ideal. I was an adoptee, so was my brother. And that we were gaps. That we were what our mom insisted on having because she had miscarried a number of times. And when one of your parents explains to you in the clear when you're about 8 or 9 that you were not their idea, that can kind of mold your view of what parenthood is looking like now and what it really shouldn't. So I come from that kind of background where my act of subversion was to make the kids' parents actually good. And not only good in terms of just being as good parents as they could under the circumstances, but also when thrown into crisis situations, responding in ways that are frankly better than we might expect. When it blows up in Deep Wizardry, when the kids come out,
I just reread that and was just thinking about that. They're trying to be sneaky. They're trying to lie. They're too smart.
They hate it. They hate it. It's it's getting up their nose, and they hate it not just for wizardly ethical reasons, but because they hate it.
They love their parents.
They love their parents. So I had a God's own fight with my editor over the fight scene in that book. She was deeply disturbed by this, and she said, you can't do that. It shows the kids disrespecting her parents. And I'm going, no, because actually these kids have grasped the higher ethics that their parents have been trying to teach them. And if it's a question of the lives of maybe 10 or 15 million people potentially, and doing what your parents say, then you look higher. And if it makes a noise, then it makes a noise. I just said to my editor, you just leave this with me. It's going to be okay, but you're going to have to leave this alone. And you could see it crawling like ants all over her skin. It made it crazy. But when the book came out and when it got the praise that it got, to sort of everybody's surprise, because I was expecting the earth to swallow me, I said, see, I told you it was going to be okay. And I've tried to continue running with the idea that if you've got the right parents, they will be there for you in ways you couldn't have imagined if you come clean with them. And hiding it, there are other wizards in the universe who we see they don't tell their parents, and that's the way things work for them. But just this once, I wanted to fly in the face of received wisdom. And it worked a bit. So. Next.
So CB,
Welcome.
We're talking about why the orphans, why is everybody an orphan or has abusive parents, or like why the parent problem?
It's an interesting thing to see in young adult fiction, and I feel like that, like, you know, as a child I connected a lot to these type of stories because it's about like escapism, and like a lot of fiction, you know, that was like in the 90s, and like, you know, a lot of like, in order for the kids to have an adventure, to like, they had to like go away. And there are some, like, I remember as a kid connecting really well with like the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. And it was like these kids were running away, right? And there is a sense of like that deep pervading loneliness of like not being understood as a child. And I feel like that's something that a lot of kids do relate to. But I also really vibe a lot with like what Diane was saying about having, like, not having an ideal childhood. Like it's been really interesting to see this evolve in my work too, because the kids in the Sidekick Squad series have parents who are present and are very supportive. And, you know, it's a queer series. The main characters are all queer. And I didn't want the main sense of conflict to be anything about like, you know, I didn't want any of these kids to struggle with like their parents not being supportive or having to worry about coming out to them, or like, and so they're always, in a sense, for at least on the emotional side, the parents react as the, you know, as a very ideal, because it's part of the right, it's part of the escapism for me, that I want you know, queer youth to be able to feel like, okay, in this universe there's a lot of things happening, like superpowers and, you know, corrupt government and like things that they're struggling with, but at home things are solid, things feel good. And I wanted
don't have that additional struggle.
Right. I wanted them to have that
nice.
place of support. And so when the adventure starts, like the parents, like, and the parents are all like superheroes and they have their own things going on in their own right. But part of like what I wanted to address in this series was that the parents have different things going on, right? So they may not see the whole picture, or they're wrapped up in their own picture. And then some of the parents have actually been kidnapped by supervillains and like, you know, other forces. So the idea of having, like, I wanted to have a mix of characters that experience different things, and it's part of, as you know, working my newest novel, A Clash of Steel, actually delves a lot more personally into like the main character's relationship with her mother. And so there's a much more nuanced and complex relationship where her mother, it has these very high expectations for her, and so there's a lot of internal conflict and strife where she's excuse me, trying to prove herself. And I think this is something that like is interesting to see evolve in young adult fiction, that like people are like, oh, I don't have to make them an orphan, or I don't have to make them a, you know, like the parents don't have to be like just gone, because that is a question as a reader. We're like, well, where are the parents this whole time that like, you know, this kid is off saving the world? But I, you know, there's ways, I think, as like where we see different types of relationship with parents, and I think kids both like want either to like relate heavily where you do get to see the exact nature of like, oh, this is a very complicated relationship, or this is an abusive relationship, or this is very similar to reality and I relate to it and it resonates with me, or they want to go in the complete opposite direction, and like be totally escapist, or like find some balance between the two. And I'm glad that there's like, you know, in literature there's become a lot more, like there's a lot more types of books to choose from with so many different relationships and protagonists.
I feel like it really definitely went through a phase for a little while where you just, if it was fantasy, they were orphans, or like, or abusive step parent. And I did it. I was saying, you know, my first book, Dragon Slippers, she's an orphan because her parents got in the way in the first draft. And then I did a bunch of fairy tales where it's the standard. It's the, you know, not having parents is why you're lost in the woods or talking to a cat or whatever it is, you know.
As one does.
But I think I'm trying to get away from it. I want to show kids, especially with my younger middle grade books, the type of family I had, because I have a really wonderful family, and my siblings, we're all besties, and my parents are very loving and supportive, and I know a lot of kids don't have that, and I feel that is a part of the escape into my fantasy world. Is here's this world with a magic castle, and you have a griffin for a pet, and also your parents love you and support you, is like part of the fantasy for so many kids. And I feel like I'm seeing a lot more of that as well, of like more of the supportive family systems and stuff like that in the fantasy fiction, because I feel like they're like, okay, there's enough going on with the world nearly ending and this kid being the chosen one for them to also have to deal with their mom's a bitch. Like,
yeah, and I love that too, because there's so much like that you can do with the mentorship aspect. They're like, what if, like, can you ask your parents for help? What is the complicated like notion of like not asking your parents for help? And
finding out your mom's skill set includes assassin, and you're just like, oh my gosh, yes.
You know, it's fun. I'm getting ready in the next year to start work on something that kind of flips this trope. You know, here's a mother, she's doing remote working or something from home, single mom. You know, the daughter's going out somewhere, and you know, she's at home, you know, she's talking to somebody, you know, 5 states over, helping them, you know, sort out the cup holder problem with their CD or some such. And her child runs back into the house and says, "Mom, it's okay, I'm back. And she goes, you were where? Where were you?" And what she doesn't know, but soon finds out, is that her daughter's been through one of those portals and has just spent like 8 years in another universe.
Oh, goodness.
And now she has to figure out what to do about this. The working title, surprise, is Unchosen. And so I'm, you know, it's going to take a while for this to come together. It walked into the house and trampled me about 3 months ago. And when I picked myself up off the floor and dusted myself, and inquired, you know, whether anyone had seen the number of that truck, I realized I was possibly onto something here. So that one's in the hopper now, and it's going to be very interesting to take all the, you know, magical childhood and portal fantasy tropes and not so much invert them as turn them inside out, and be looking at them from the wrong part of inside, because I can see quite clearly a situation where her mother follows her daughter into this other universe and finds you know, that her daughter is this beautiful mature queen of about 25, where she was 14 a minute ago. And B, that she is the bad guy. And she kind of wants to know what happened here. And, you know, it's going to go a lot deeper than that, obviously. There's going to be a lot more to play with. But to take that entire setup and play with it from the adult's point of view rather than with the child's. This is going to be most interesting. We'll see how it works. I mean, there's a lot of work, you know, between me and sitting down to get hard to grips with that. I haven't even told my agent about this yet.
Ooh, we got a sneak preview.
No, he's a busy man, and you know, I don't want to make him too crazy, but I prefer actually to have some. I would prefer to put 3 chapters in an outline on his desk and say, "Don, kill."
That sounds amazing. I think it would be so fascinating just to explore, like, right, then the mom has to deal with, like, you know, what about her choices are reflected in her child at this point.
Yeah, really. And you know why, you know, is her daughter like, well, absolutely, the whole thing. I mean, it harks back briefly to that moment in Deep Wizardry where it becomes plain to the parents that they have no choice but to accede to the way things are, because Kit simply says, "Okay, fine, you don't get it." how are you going to stop us?
Uh-huh.
And there's no way. And suddenly, one sentence, the power balance completely flips. And he says, it might be that you need to forget all about this, and it would be really sad if we had to do that, but this is more important. And they go, ugh. It never occurred to them until that moment in this argument that maybe, they don't get to say.
Mm-hmm.
So that, the question of flipping the power balance, it's always fun.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful moment. And so Deep Wizardry is like my favorite of all the Young Wizard books, and I've like read it over and over again. And part of like
not be alone in that opinion, I have to tell you.
Definitely not.
I loved it so much, and as again, like part of CrossingsCons and being such an honor to be here, being virtually sitting here next to you and getting to talk to you about what as a teenager I loved the idea and was like terrified and heartbroken for Nita, like the choice that she had to go through, and like and the most terrifying thing as we get to that realization was that she could not tell her parents, right? And she, when she's faced with this decision, that like I was terrified for her. I was like, she's gonna have to go through this whole thing and her parents don't get to know and she can't tell them. And so when that argument happened, I was a little like emotionally like a wreck, but I was like relieved because I was like, oh, okay, she can say like, they know, at least a depth of what's going on. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about like Tom and Carl, because they get to be, in lieu of like, Nita doesn't get to tell her parents, but they get to be the ones who are like, hey, I'm an adult. I'm here to support you in that role.
Absolutely. They are or were, God rest them now, the best married couple I've ever known. They were my sort of role models for what a good working marriage would look like. And because I made the mistake, all right, it's a rookie error of Tuckerizing your friends, all right? And when you're doing it for, what seems like a minor role in a single book, yeah, fine, okay, and I do that. Nobody gets into my book who's not a friend of mine. I do not Tuckerize my enemies. My page real estate is too precious to me at this level for me want to have to cart around people I don't like. If you're in one of my books, it's because I like you. And that's how it started. And then I realized suddenly that, wait a minute, these books are becoming a thing and these guys have lives. And as people began to be more insistent with me about the question of what their relationship was, I had to dig my heels in a bit and say, I'm really sorry, but you do not get to play the representation card with me. These guys are actual people who, and I have a responsibility of confidentiality toward them. You don't like it? Tough. And I had some people give me some trouble about it on Tumblr, and I just sort of went, yeah, no. Try it with somebody else. It's not going anywhere. And that said, to quote McCoy's line about being able to see very obvious things, frankly, a blind man could see with a cane that Tom and Carl were an item.
Oh yeah.
So and
I just always assumed, even as a young Mormon in Idaho, I'm like, oh,
absolutely, it kind of jumps out very, very much. So that I didn't like the understanding that it would probably be theoretically, hopefully, a long time before this status could be broken, and then unfortunately, first Carl and then Tom died within a very short time of each other, and frankly, I was not surprised. It was one of those partnerships that there's no sense that one would linger long after the other was gone. And when that, became plain that I was now sort of released from my confidentiality, especially since Tom had gone public by leading the Gay Pride Parade in Puerto Vallarta or something. He was their parade marshal. I'm going, okay, I think we can now safely say this cat is out of the bag. And so when I did what's its face, I'll Be Home for Christmas last year, the first thing we see is them waking up in bed. You know, it's like the beginning of the Rosencavalier. And you know, I said, fine, let's just, you know, if we're going to come out of the closet, let's bang the door on the way out, shall we? And so there we are. But partly, the other thing about it was not just the, you know, the quality of, hey, let's have a couple mentors who are gay, which is a good thing, but also that Tom in particular was one of the best story editors I've ever worked with. He was one of my pair of story editors at Hanna-Barbera, with whom I did a whole, the other is a gent named Duane. And you know, we went through endless amounts of Scooby-Doo and Captain Caveman, and God help me, the animated Laverne and Shirley. You know, things that one does not routinely speak of.
Oh my gosh, I'd forgotten there was an animated Laverne and Shirley.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying. I did a few of those.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, I mean, my first work for Scooby-Doo paid for So You Want to Be a Wizard. It kept me eating. While, you know, Scrappy, you know, writing for Scrappy kept me eating while I was writing that book. So it was possible at that point to make quite good money off 20 minutes of animation would be, you know, like $1,500 for the script. And $1,500, like $1979. So that would get you a fair way down the road. But Tom's gift as a story editor and just his abilities for not shaming you for not knowing things, but making you understand that you needed a better understanding of something, and he would point you at where to get it, or he would teach you stuff without you feeling like an idiot. That kind of tone of mind was uniquely his, and so his character reads exactly like him in the books. That was what working with Tom Swaile was like, even if you were, you know, talking about Scooby-Doo at the time. It's very funny, but he was a tremendously positive teacher. He had that art of drawing you into the part of the learning where you needed to be without making you feel like an idiot. And that's why he's the senior wizard he is, you know. And they loved that, by the way. They loved that to bits. Sort of the last thing conversation I had with Carl when we were talking about Games Wizards Play, and he said, "Am I in it?" I said, "Of course you're in it. For God's sake, we can't do this without you."
So this is actually an excellent point to go into one of our next questions, which is how do you create adult characters that are helpful and supportive while still allowing the youth characters the independence and autonomy necessary for them to be protagonists? And obviously one solution is no Tom Swaile and Carl Romeo and stick them in your books.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us.
No, but you get to say how much power your mentor characters have. You know, if you're some poor kid who's stuck in a boarding school with wizards who can, you know, lock you in a cupboard or something if you're not behaving yourself, that's one kind of control. But you know, maybe it's better to go in another direction. Our guys, it's plainly supervisory and stated as such. The only time that you get come down on hard is if you're part of a team job and you're assigned a role and you purposely go over the rails and fulfill that role. If something goes wrong, that's one thing. But if you willfully say, no, I'm not doing that thing that you told me to do, I'm doing this thing over here, just because I damn well feel like it, that is going to get Arena and the baby and the parakeet on your doorstep real quick. And you'll wish you hadn't done that. You know, it's up to you. You get to say what power your mentors have to interfere or you know, influence their mentees. Mentee, is that a word now?
Mentee? Yes, it is.
You've said it, so it's a word now.
Oh God. But you get to say, and if you choose to be, you know, a little lighter on the coercive side of it than others, well, fine. That's what you do.
I think too it comes down to what respect they have for the younger character. Like a teacher or a parent or someone who is just like, oh, let me fix that. You can't do this. You're a kid. They're not a mentor, for one thing. They're just going to take over. Like a good mentor is, like you were saying, is going to be guiding them and stuff. I think they have to have a respect for the person that they're mentoring. They have to have respect for their skills and, and compassion too for their situation. Like, like in Deep Wizardry, as we're saying, he has such compassion for her. He meets her on the beach. I think it's hilarious. He's in a towel because he just came out of the shower. But I always remember that.
I'm sorry.
You
If that
rang.
was me enjoying myself a little bit, I can't help it. He was a good-looking man.
And I got that.
I am allowed to ship my own characters. All right.
You certainly
They were both good-looking guys, and I can't help that. It's just what's so. It was the only way I was ever going to see him in a towel. Really, I mean, you got to be appropriate about these things. Yeah.
So he's like, you've committed to this, so he could just say, well, you're a child, you can't, but she can.
Yeah.
And he respects that. He's like, you have committed to this, and this is very important. So I'll give you the support you need, but this is on you. And there's such love and compassion for her, as well as respect for her as a wizard. And I really think that's what it comes down to. And it makes me think too of if you've read Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Coville, where he's trying to care for this dragon. And the local librarian, you realize, has been in the same situation. She herself has at one point raised a baby dragon. So she's there like, you've got to protect it, like secretly giving him the information he needs, not to step on his toes because this is his journey. And then just sort of stepping back and being like, I'll be here if you need something, but take these books. Wink, wink, And I love that about her, because she so clearly is like, this boy, he needs this and he can handle it. And I'm just going to sit back and make sure everything goes okay. But she was such a gentle, loving person. I can't think of her name, but it's the librarian. She's the librarian. Yeah. The librarian is just such a gentle, loving person. And she knows what he's been through. She's been through it. You raise your dragon and then you have to give it up. And it's heartbreaking, but she's been there and she's like, you can get through this. So I just love that. Like I love that the mentor has to kind of know what they're talking about, like from personal experience, I feel, to like really understand, like, this is heartbreaking, but I survived. You can too. You got this, kiddo.
Mm-hmm. That's such a beautiful way to look at it. But as far as like the respect and also recognizing their journey, and that you're like, as the adult, right, understanding your role as a mentor. I taught middle school for a number of years, and I've also worked in a number of nonprofits working with youth. And so a lot of these kids sometimes will do as like, I need you to tell me what to do, because that's society has trained them to be like, do what the adults tell you to. Mm-hmm. But when they're presented with a situation where okay, here's a challenge. It's a fictional challenge. It's a metaphor. You're gonna climb this mountain, or you're going to solve this problem with your team. But the adults are there to be like, you have the resources. I'm here as an option if you want to ask me questions. But ultimately, how you solve the problem is up to you. And I'm not going to tell you whether it's right or wrong. And I'm not going to tell you, like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, because it's your choice. And as a kid, I think in the situations when I had the opportunity to do that, it was really precious to me, where an adult was like, hey, you have the agency to choose, and to choose to like, and even if that choice was going to end badly for me, if I was going to fail, or like, I remember my dad was like, all right, you're going to go rollerblading. Okay. All right. I'm going to watch you go down that hill. It's very steep, but and that taking care of like allowing the youth character, the mentee character, like recognizing that they could get hurt, they could fail, they might not be able to solve the problem, and respecting that choice, and not just stepping in and be like, oh, let me solve this for you, but and having the respect for their agency. I think that one of that makes like where coming back as a writer in the fiction, like that who is the main character here, right? And looking at that dynamic and seeing can you trust this person? And so there's a lot of interesting ways that you could like subvert this, a lot of fascinating fiction. Like I love like relationships where you're like, oh, this adult who I thought was a mentor was actually manipulating me the whole time, or there's a sense of betrayal if like
that's such a gut punch when you
it is
and admiring them, and they've been helping you, and then you're like, oh, you were doing this for you, huh?
Right. Or you were really helping you, or like you lied to me about this, or like and that's such a like an interesting dynamic, because it flips that trust, because as the youth, like who and why do you trust, and that comes back to the character, like their perspective, what they've been through, can they trust adults or not in their lives? And that's a great like thing to explore in these types of relationships.
And by great, you mean really mean. Like, the ultimate betrayal. It's great to explore.
It's funny, that moment from Hogfather has been on my mind today, among other stuff about Terry Pratchett. The line about the little girl who's given a sword for Hog's Watch, and the adult saying, no, she could cut herself. And the answer is, that will be a very important lesson. It's just like, give her the sword. Let's see what happens,
Yeah. Questions? We have more. Are there any fictional parents or guardians that made an impact on you in your youth, and why?
No. It's really probably if I think about that for a while, someone will come up. I mean, probably about 3 minutes after we finish.
Oh, that's what Twitter's for.
Yeah, well, it's so true. The tweet nostalgia. Nope, I got nothing. Anybody else have anything?
Well, I always think I loved A Little Princess by Burnett as a kid. There was something so satisfying to me about, I loved lists of people's clothes and stuff like that. it was very, and she had this many dresses and these many were satin, and she had these starched petticoats, and her doll had a fur muff, and all those things. It was very satisfying, and it was so horrible to see that taken away. And just the whole situation with Miss Minchin, where Sarah was such a loving child that if Miss Minchin or had the opportunity to care for her, and she did not take it, because for her it was all about the money. And the whole time you're almost, because I just a year or so ago read this aloud to my kids, and the whole time I was thinking, does Sarah get real bitter? Because I couldn't remember all of a sudden, because you look at it and she does not, because she is such a good person and she's so willing to trust. And I just think like that, and the older girls and stuff, and you see how some of them are snots to her and some of them are secretly nice, but they're, the mean girl makes them be mean, and just how that all works. It's very realistic. And I just think like Sarah is such a good character and stuff like that. She does have her moments where she is in despair and stuff like that. But there is a time when she pretty much looks at Miss Minchin and kind of is like, and they really played up in the movie that came out in the 90s, that she basically in the movie says to her, if you had been kind to me for 1 second, I would have loved you.
Yeah.
And you threw it away, basically. And there is a moment where she's sort of facing off with her, and both of them are kind of waiting for the other to crack in the book. Like, if if Miss Minchin had just been like, okay, we're not going to treat you as a total servant, but you're going to be sort of like a lesser student or something, Sarah would have rolled with it. But she felt like she had to punish her because she was so rich, had been so rich and stuff. And it's interesting to see that, like, because she's never presented as a mother figure, but she could have been. Like, it's such an interesting, for that time period, that type of book where everyone's it's a very morality tale type of vibe to a lot of those older children's books and stuff. And you see someone who could have been a figure of compassion or something like that, and they just aren't. So it was really, you know, the sacred womanhood of the Victorians is just really on its head there with Miss Minchin, because here she has this school for girls and it's all for show. Everything she said to the dad about, like, she shall be as my own daughter and stuff when they arrive is strictly for show. It's all about money. She's incredibly greedy. And when there's no money, she's just like, that's all she cares about. So it's really fascinating to me because she's so awful and yet she can't turn Sarah to the dark side.
It's like, what's her face in Annie?
Yes, Miss Hannigan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Little girls.
Oh God, I dote on that.
Carol Burnett does not
really
get enough credit.
Honestly, so extraordinary.
That whole part, and it's Bernadette Peters and Tim Curry are her brother Rooster and his wife.
Yeah.
And Bernadette Peters with her tiny little mouth. We wanted a child.
It's a fabulous flick. I love the play. I love the movie. Carol Burnett in particular. You know, what's to be said?
Her sitting there on the side of her bathtub full of gin.
Yeah.
Little girls.
Oh God, yeah.
Glorious.
I do have some like contemporary favorites. I think as I read a ton of fiction as a teenager, and then like I didn't read for a long while because I got wrapped up in like college and jobs and stuff. And then now as an adult coming back and just like, I'm just going to read everything I wanted to read ever. And there's so much now and it's amazing. Some parents that I've really loved, Zoraida Cordova's Bruja Born series has an incredible, it's a series about a set of witches in Brooklyn, and it's a family history. Everyone in their family have been brujas, and so that dynamic, the relationships are so beautiful because you get that very like, you know, the support, but also like everyone has to go on their own journey, and like you got yourself in a pickle, and I'm gonna be here to help you, like give you a sense of like help out of it, but I'm not going to do it for you. That relationship was really great. I also really loved Sarah Kuhn's newest book, From Little Tokyo with Love, is about a young Japanese American girl who's mixed race, and she's being raised by her two gay aunts. And so she didn't know her parents in a sense, but like the mentorship she gets from her aunts, the love and support. And even as she's going on this journey of like, I need to find out who, like, I need to learn more about my parents or find my real mom. It's never shown as a way of like, it's not because I don't have love in my family, but as a sense of like identity and where she is. And so there's a lot of, I think, you know, and this comes back to the first question about like, I think a lot of authors who have maybe grown up with that fiction of like, where have all the parents gone, are now like, engaging with that, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna draw on these relationships on like whether this is a very real, like playing with all that trope, and also like I'm gonna show all sorts of different relationships, so supportive families, show families with complex dynamics, and show people getting to engage with all of that.
Is that something that you noticed happening to you as well? Like, has your sort of opinion on like parents and mentors in fiction changed from when you were a child to as you became an adult and started writing?
I think as a young writer, I went with the same trope where I was like, the kids are orphans, they go on an adventure, or the parents are not present, because I think it was difficult for me to imagine or to like involve them in that sort of universe, right? Because as a child who's loved like science fiction and fantasy, and also feeling like an outsider in my own home, and also like was like, oh, this is something that's just for me. And so if my parent was involved in it, then it would change the dynamic, right? But and I can see this as like, you know, as a young writer, like, you know, my first, you know, when I was in 8th grade, I like started to write like a novel in my notebook, and so that was a very like high fantasy young orphan finds their way. And I think it comes with like maturity and understanding of myself and like my own relationship and what I'm like being able to deal with more as my skill set grows. I think it has become part of writing. And like, you know, A Clash of Steel is like my 6th novel. And so being able to write that mother-daughter relationship in a way that like showed the complexity of the love, but also the like jealousy, the why weren't you there for me, the like why did you choose this, why did you leave me, a lot of these feelings were tied into a lot of complex personal stuff that I dealt with but didn't have the strength to engage with. And so a lot of my earlier novels have just like supportive parents that have been there from the start. And so getting to deal with that, I think, is part of my own writing journey, is like, oh, yeah, now that I've like, you know, I've gotten more like books under my belt, I know what I'm doing now. Now I have this sense and a lot more therapy behind me too. Like, okay, how do I effectively like deal with this in a novel?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a part of how you grow into your strengths as a writer. It, you know, no question, it's a journey, and there's something you can do, you know, 2 years from now that you can't do now. That's the case all the time. I don't think I either had any desire or the skills to deal with toxic parenting in the Young Wizards universe until I got as far as Games Wizards Play. That's a long time. You know, but that's fine. At that point, I was able to look way back at that, you know, over the vast desert of years between now and when I was, you know, 13, and say, okay, this is how it looks, and this is, you know, here's the mulch you can make of that experience now that it's been through the chipper, so to speak, because, you know, you would have seen in GWP that, you know, some of the relationships that some of the younger wizards are with their parents are not great, or with their mentor or authority figures or their extended families. The young Iranian wizard that Diane winds up working with, you know, she's in a horrible place, and, you know, she blasts out of it. I can't say that it doesn't have anything to do with Doreen. It does. I mean, you know, put anybody in a room with Doreen for long enough and something's going to give. Really. But it was just, you know, it was the right time to take that kind of material on for me. Into it. It takes time sometimes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that one, Jess?
I'm much the same. I'm as CB, that I feel like it was easy. It's an easy cop out to just go, they're orphans, and so you don't have to worry about them sneaking out of the house or dealing with their home situation. And so I feel like now I'm more into like, so what is the family relationship? And I won't say all my people have loving families, because if you have read the Rose Legacy series, the villain of the books may surprise you if you have not. But I do like, instead of just going orphans, yay, like, because it's harder to like think about. It's another layer to like, what's their family situation adds another layer. And I feel like as a baby writer, I was sort of like, my editor saw, what if they're orphans? So I was like, yes, so easy. Like, everybody's an orphan. Woo, orphans for all. So and now it's sort of like, okay, well, this person's family situation is this and this, and that's how it affects them and how they make their choices. And this person's family situation is this, and that's how it affects their personality and what choices they're going to make. It's harder. But I'm a grown up, dang it, and I have to do it.
You just gave me a really terrible idea for a novel. This is awful. Oh, God.
Oh, do tell.
No, yes. The Orphaned Wizard Agency.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, this is the setup. You know, I would have to develop a completely different magic system for this that would have nothing to do with YW. But the idea would be, you know, you've come into your power. God, I can just see the ads now. You've come into your power. Your parents are in the way. Call us 24 hours a day. We will assassinate your folks.
So does the agency take
Either
care
that,
of the
I was
I
parents?
told you it was terrible.
I was picturing the people that go
I'm an
around and
awful
collect
person. No
orphans
one
and tell them
believes
they're
me.
now wizards.
No, this is fascinating because is it like you can only have powers if you do a murder?
Yeah. You have to be free to use them. You find a way. You find a way to finesse this.
Uh-huh.
You know, are you envious of kids who are naturally orphans? Can help you? No, seriously, it would be so dark.
That is
it's like
that
a
is
novella.
sort
It's the
of
kind of thing you
the
would wake
premise
up.
of the Willoughbys that they've also made a little Netflix cartoon of, the Willoughbys, where it references all these old books, all the Nesbit and all
Oh,
the
dear.
things, and it's just like the kids decide after having read a lot of books that really it would be better if they were orphans. That's when they could have adventures. And they try to get rid of their parents.
Oh dear.
But I was just
Oh,
thinking,
dear.
because I have a couple of friends. I don't know if you guys know Schlock Mercenary, the online comic.
Yes.
Schlock Mercenary by Howard Taylor. Howard is an orphan, and he and his brother Randy, who's also a comedy writer, like they have friends that tease them online, like, is that part of your orphan powers? Like they're just like, because they're always like, Randy especially is always like, well, it's part of my special powers as an orphan. And so they always tease about like your special orphan powers. It's like, it reminds me too of the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reedy, where Mendenbar, the king of the Enchanted Forest, is in charge of making sure that like kidnapped heirs get back, and like Rumpelstiltskin's brother, who's changed his name to Charlie so it'll be easier to guess, but he's got all the kids that nobody wanted, and so they know his name is Charlie, but they won't say it, so he's raising all these kids.
Oh gosh.
The long lost heir business, and he's like, you can deliver these kids in 20 years when they're grown up and charge a fee for delivering their long lost heir. He's got all the kids like, I'll take your firstborn, and they're like, okay.
Yes. Oh God! Now I got to think. How am I going to frame this damn thing as a novella? Oh God! All right, no, leave it with me. I'll make notes when we're finished here.
The Enchanted Forest also has the League of Wicked Stepmothers and the Evil Uncle Auxiliary. There's like one guy that wanted in, and so they put him in an auxiliary. He's an evil uncle to his nephew.
I love that. It's mad. Oh God! You know, this is what gets dangerous. I mean, you know, when you start subverting tropes, it can lead you down some very interesting paths.
And the next thing you know, you're calling your agent, and she's just like, I thought we had a schedule.
No, this is why I don't propose new material to him until I know I have a clear space in front of me. It's just, it drives us both nuts, and it's not kind. It's not kind to do that to your agent. So, you know, better to save it for next year sometime. Oh God, my calendar. No, it's just, you know, why am I complaining that I have work to do and people give me money? It's just, you know, you can't even see. Is there a tunnel? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? I don't want there to be one. I mean, that's the other side of it, of course, because the day that you see the light, that means you don't have a contract blocking it. Right. And then you start to twitch. You know, whatever. It'll get sorted out. But that one was unusually dark even for me. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while. Seriously.
All right. Well, we are a little over time, but why don't we try and squeeze out one last question before we go?
Sure.
And that is, do you have any advice for writing three-dimensional adults in youth and YA fiction?
That's hilarious, because usually you get asked like, how do you write kids, because there's so many people like struggling with that. Well, you want just kind of the things that we were saying is you want to think about a real adult, you know, for one thing. Like you've talked to other humans, I hope. Like think about a real adult that you know, but you also want to make sure that, because this is a criticism I've seen, like for a friend's manuscript, that basically he had the adult was almost not there because because it's a kid's book, and then suddenly at the end, Deus Ex Machina, the adult swooped in and was like, "I have the formula to kill the aliens," and they're like,
Deus Ex
so
Mom.
You want to have,
Yeah.
you want to take your adults, you want them to be a three-dimensional real person, so you've almost got to give them a reason to not be the main character.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to step it back a notch, I think. Like they aren't the chosen one. They don't have the power, or or they're totally oblivious to what their kids are sneaking out and doing, or something.
Yeah.
You want to make a picture a real human being, and then just step them back just a notch to where they're oblivious, or they can't be involved, or they're put into an enchanted sleep.
Find a real human being and then pick a flaw. We've all got one of those. Some of us have more than one. But just pick one that will serve your story and let the characters run with it. There's so many different ways to be both, three-dimensional as an adult and still broken enough to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What's the line there? The crack where the light gets in. It can be a crack, and still the light gets in through it. So you can play that part of the game both ways in terms of character. That this major difficulty is still the thing that makes them human and enables them to perceive other people's humanity. You poke it until it works, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think both Jess and Dan, your suggestions of how do you thinking of them as a person, with flaws and everything, and I like to, for a young writer, I think you're very focused on the journey of your main characters, right? But just remember that everyone in this story is on their own journey, right? Whether it's parallel or intersecting your main character's journey, that they are, whatever they want, they want something. They have their own thing going on. And whether that gets resolved or not in your book, that's going to be on their mind. So remembering that, having and the reader doesn't have to know. If you know it, I know that Bob has always wanted to quit his corporate job and join the circus. In scene 1, we see him juggling sadly or something just a little glimpse into their inner lives gives you the ability to be I know who Bob is. I know who this person is. And then thinking about the relationships they have with your main characters is also important, because it's who is Bob to my main character? What kind of relationship have they have? Why or why not can we have this sort of, what kind of support can they give? What kind of support are they not giving? Or maybe they're doing the opposite. Maybe they're actively trying to thwart the main character or get in their way. And part of what makes, and this is just for side characters or characters who aren't your main character in general, I feel like it's helpful to think of if you remove them from the story, what would happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they important? Could you replace them with a lamp? And what? And if you can replace them, them with a lamp or another inanimate object, then why are they there?
Mm-hmm.
If that person okay, this relationship is interesting and I want to explore it, great. But if this is just why is this person in the scene? Oh, because I needed someone to give them their coffee, or I needed someone to reveal this important piece of plot mission, or this person was holding the MacGuffin at this time and knows what it does.
Mm-hmm.
Can you replace them with a lamp?
I'm afraid
that forever. That's awesome.
It says too much about me that when I hear that phrase, the lamp I see is the one from Christmas Story. It's too revealing.
I think that's another trope that I've cannibalized from movies, where it's the sexy lamp problem, where it's does this woman in the story have a purpose, or is she there to be a sexy lamp?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
A sexy lamp with a sticky note on it, which is where you put the plot relevant information.
Yeah. It's a variation of the method of loci. let's not go. Oh God, that's achieved a whole new set of meanings this last month, hasn't it? The method of loci, the mind palace method. Now I'm thinking about the method of Loki, which involves knives. Lots of knives. Anyway, oh God.
Anyway,
Lots of knives and an alligator.
Alligator Loki is the best thing in the world. I'm sorry. I fell deeply in love with
As soon as we saw that shot, that end scene, my littlest, who's 9, went, "Oh, he has a pet alligator." I said, "No, that's a Loki." I'm just like, that's.
I love that because it's like the glimpse into the alligator verse, whereas like, is Thor like a particularly buff toad? Like,
yes.
like, they've already started doing that. Thor is Kermit.
oh my
And that therefore
no.
turns Kermit into a Disney prince.
Oh no.
We're all sorted now. You know, I've already seen the fan art. Some of it is fabulous.
Oh, there's some great stuff.
Just, go into Tumblr, type fan art, alligator Loki, and, kiss an hour or two goodbye. quite wondrous. Oh, jeez. Anyway.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for telling us so many things.
And we got to watch Diane formulate a new book.
I'm going to be hearing about that towel, aren't I?
Oh, possibly. Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us. I think we have a fairly free afternoon here at Slipping Sideways. And the next panel on the schedule is the race and time travel at 5:30. Although if you are signed up to have a meet and greet with either Diane or CB Lee, check your email. Those start at 5 and 6 respectively. And so enjoy your afternoon. We will see you all back here later.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Take care.
Righto.